Good morning, Martha. Glad you could join us. Glad to have you with us. Why don't I jump in and just say greetings to everyone who's watching this at some point. We're recording this on the 19th of October, and we're glad to be able to share some thoughts with you about Resolution 3, which relates to an amendment to the process by which we elect a bishop. So why don't we perhaps start with some prayer? Bishop, could you lead us in starting that way?
I'd be happy to. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Gracious and loving God, we praise you and we bless you. We give you thanks for the gift of this day. We ask you to make your Spirit's presence known in this conversation, that we might know how it is you are calling us to be your church in this world. All this we ask in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you. Maybe it'll help to also do some quick introductions. I'm Brad Babbitt. I serve as the Chancellor of the Diocese, which is just a fancy word for being the bishop's lawyer. And in that capacity, I'm the convener of the Faith and Order Commission, which is the sponsor of our resolution. And we have a few other members of our commission with us on the Zoom today, and perhaps they can introduce themselves. Bishop, I'll throw it to you.
My name is Jeff Bello. I serve as your Bishop Diocesan.
Excellent. Thank you. Linda?
My name is Linda Spires. I'm a member of the Faith and Order Commission and was also one of the co-chairs of the Bishop Transition Committee.
Thank you. Zach?
I am Zachary Cole. I'm a layman clergy spouse, attending St. Mark's in Mystic, and when I attend my wife's parish, St. Paul and St. James in New Haven. I serve on the Faith and Order Committee and the Standing Committee, and was a member of the Bishop Transition Committee.
And in his free time, he's also a lawyer down in the southeast corner of the state.
Yeah.
Martha?
I'm a retired lady. My church is St. Peter's in South Windsor, and I'm a volunteer for this commission.
Terrific. Thank you, Martha. So I think a great place to start is with Linda and Zach, both who have shared with you that they were members of the Bishop Transition Committee in this most recent election, which was hugely successful, obviously. And Faith and Order spent a few meetings and spent some hours with Linda and Zach and other members of the Bishop Transition Committee in that process, learning what worked, what could have worked better, and thinking through sort of what is our process and how might it be improved and how might we take advantage of the good things that were the good aspects of it. So let me turn to Linda and Zach and ask them perhaps to set the table a little bit about what worked, what we're trying to improve, because I think that really does inform what Resolution 3 is all about. Linda and Zach, I'll leave it to you.
Zach, you want me to begin or?
Yes, as the chair, you can go first.
Co-chair. Okay.
Co-chair.
So I had the opportunity of being a co-chair on the Bishop Transition Committee, and my other co-chair was Marcia Adele, a wonderful partner in this work. And I think the most successful thing that I can say about the work that we did is the bishop that's sitting before us now. We are very delighted in the outcome of our process, and we got together as a Bishop Transition Committee after the consecration and just brainstormed what, as Brad said, what worked well, what didn't, what we might need to think about changing. And we had a very large group of people, one body of people who did both the search process for nominees and candidates. And then that same body of people, predominantly the same body, went into the transition mode after the bishop-elect was in place. And it was a lot of work there were 24 of us that started, and we lost a few people due to transitions in their own lives, and ended up with 18 people. And those 18 continued for a year and a half, roughly, doing this work. A lot of work for people who are otherwise doing full-time jobs in many cases. And we, in many years past in Connecticut, we had 2 different committees, transition committee as well as a selection committee. And the more we talked about it, we thought it might be more prudent to have 2 committees again. So that, I think that's the one thing that we're going into convention with this resolution is to have 2 different bodies of people with some cross transition between the 2. There were some members of the committee who we were 24 people in the beginning coming into a room, many of us not knowing each other. So we had to organize ourselves. We had to talk about whether we needed a consultant or not. And it was the beginning part of our process was a little bit rough in terms of making progress, but we did make wonderful progress and worked well together. And another piece that was a little bit challenging for us, most of our meetings were on Zoom. We did not meet in person for about 6 to 9 months after we had gotten started. So that I think was a little bit of a challenge for us also, but we managed to do it. And as I said, we're happy to have the bishop that we have right now. So Zach, I'll turn it over to you and see what you want to add.
Thank you, Linda. I agree with a lot of what Linda said. I think we're not unhappy with the result. We're happy with the outcome of under the existing bishop transition process. But I agree there were some things that we wanted to see improved and to help the next group that has to come along and do this work to be prepared for success. And as Linda said, that kind of had a few different parts. First was just in the beginning, as she said, ensuring that someone has been thinking about these things since the last bishop election, which in our case had been over a decade. And so Linda was the only person on the committee who had served previously, I believe, in a transition. So there wasn't a lot of institutional memory on our part as to how to go about this. There was, as she mentioned, just some, it took some time to kind of get up and running when at the early point in the process, there's kind of some crunch time to get yourself organized and then begin listening to the people within the diocese before there is, you've got to start taking more action steps and actually putting out the call and start interviewing people. So it is, although it's, around an 18-month process, it's not, it moves very quickly, and to get a bunch of volunteers in the room and working together does take some time and some effort, especially when, as Linda said, many of us didn't know each other coming in. And so we're hoping to create a process that is more intentional in between times and helps set the committee off and running. Also, as Linda mentioned, there's some, it is a big time commitment. There's 24 people, there were 24 people on under the existing structure serving for 18 months plus, and it's a heavy time commitment. And so trying to find a way to break it up the way it has been done in other dioceses and had been in our diocese in the past, we felt would be beneficial. Also, we also wanted to ensure that not only are we listening to all voices within the diocese during a call, but that the structure is set up in such a way that that the committees, and under the proposal, the committees better represent the makeup of the diocese. We had definitely had underrepresented or unrepresented sections of our parishes that we would like to, as best we can, try to ensure that we're hearing all voices are at the table and being heard in the process. And then, as Linda mentioned, we had some attrition, which is natural in the process. A lot of that happened early on and could be potentially, under what we're proposing, allow some filling of those seats in the future. I think that kind of covers many of the main bits that we're trying to address within this proposal.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Zach. I think that's a great way of sort of saying where we started. And I think it tees up the next consideration or next discussion, which is what's in the proposal. How do we respond? Let's start at the beginning, because I think Linda used the phrase that, the beginning was a little rough. And Zach, your comment about having somebody thinking about these issues between calls or between the times that we're electing a bishop is important. Bishop, do you want to talk about the committee and sort of what Faith and Order is proposing in terms of addressing that, how to smooth out the beginning of the process and how to create a group of people that's going to think about these issues between Episcopal elections?
Sure. I'll start us off and leave it to you to do the detail work on that. I also want to add my voice that I'm incredibly pleased with the outcome of your last process. I just feel like I need to say that. And I also need to say that, as I've been parts of other transition processes. I've heard other people talk about their diocesan transition processes from both sides. And I want ECCT to feel really good about your last process, because it really was a great process. As a candidate moving through the process, I can tell you that one of the greatest things that your last group did was really make sure that those of us in the process were well cared for and always knew what was happening. And that's not easy to do, and it's often not the case. So we were never wanting for information or wondering what was next or feeling sort of unsure. So I think we should feel really good about the process that we followed last time, and that this is really an opportunity to grow even further into what we would like to see a process to be. And one of that is because hopefully a diocese goes through something like this once every 10 to 15 years. That's the hope, I think. That it is hard when you're doing something once every 10 to 15 years to remember what happened last time, what worked, what were the pinch points, what did you want to do differently? And then you've got a new group of folks who are doing the work, and they bring in their own desires, which is what you want. So we want to build a system that balances historical knowledge and institutional memory with new energy, new ideas, new way of thinking, and the full voice, as Zach said, the full voice of representation from the diocese. So this proposal really seeks to hold the fact that we will someday have a bishop election again, because we are the Episcopal Church, and I can only serve until I'm 72, and we also have a bishop suffragan. So we will go through this process again. How do we create a process where when that happens, there has been ongoing time and attention paid to where we are, what we've learned, and how do we pass that on through time to the group who will then end up serving in that capacity at some point in the future. Because the other thing that happens along the way is that there's new learning throughout the church. And tech also will sometimes unveil new ways of thinking about these types of things. So we learn things from other bishop searches. a standing committee, which is what we're proposing, would be able to weave in and discern and think about that information in real time, rather than 15 years from now catching up on 15 years of change and growth in the process. So I think that's the biggest thing that that Faith and Order is proposing, is that we move from a committee that has to be created pretty quickly and not know each other and figure out the work that's in front of them, to a standing committee that has some ongoing life.
That's helpful, Bishop. Thank you. And standing committee with a small s and a small
Yes.
c, as opposed to the big S and the big
Not
C.
the standing committee.
A standing committee.
A
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll jump in and add some of the detail about that committee. We're calling it in the proposed resolution, the Committee on the Election of a Bishop. And it will be a committee made up of 3 people, 3 lay people, and 3 members of the clergy. And it will be, as Bishop Jeff mentioned, a committee that will exist each year. And the thought and the intent is, when there's not an election underway or in process, the goal is for the committee to learn best practices, to collect best practices from the church, because we learn from each other. And there's always at least a couple of dioceses in the process of electing a bishop. Of the 116, I think, dioceses, there's always somebody in the process. So there is an ongoing, consistent learning process. But it's also a teaching role, because this committee will not only be gathering information, but also sharing with the Mission Council, for example, information about what this process costs, because it is an expensive process. And it's important that that as a Mission Council, that's one of the roles of Mission Council, is to create the budget of convention every year. You got to keep that in mind, right? Because hopefully you're setting some money aside each year, so it's not just a one big expense in the year of the election or the 2 years, but instead you've been planning over a period of time. But also, the committee between Episcopal elections will be helping develop the process. So, and thinking through, how do we start this process if we had to start it next month? What are the job duties that we need to fill? What are the roles that each committee will have, the nominating committee and the transition committee? How do we go about preparing ourselves? So if we did next month or next year have to start an election process, they're up to speed. These folks will be ready to lead that process. And that's the next piece, is when thinking of it, when an Episcopal election starts, this committee will serve not only as members of these 2 committees, the nominating committee and the transition committee, but will lead them, and they will serve as the leadership of those committees, which will help smooth out the beginning, if you will, we've got leaders already identified. The leaders will be able to help convene everybody and start the process, and we'll have thought through all of the various issues and requirements, which hopefully will help both committees, both the nominating and transition committee, although the transition committee's principal work comes after the nominating committee's work, but still help them get organized, understand their duties, get to know each other, and all of the other things that go into being an effective group, and hopefully shorten the time required to do that. That's certainly the goal of this standing committee. Anybody else have thoughts they want to share about how the standing committee will do its work? I've just said standing. The committee on the election of a bishop will do its work between elections and then when election starts.
The only thing I want to add, Bart, is that moving to this model mirrors what the model that we use for the Episcopal Church writ large, which is that there is always a joint nominating committee for the election of a presiding bishop. So that is not a committee that only comes into being when there is an election to be done of a presiding bishop, but there is always a committee should the need arise in between general conventions. So just so I think that's a helpful illustration to say that this is how we exist as an Episcopal church as well.
That's great. That's helpful. Thank you. Zach, you mentioned diversity being an issue that is part of this process. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the committee on the election of the bishop hopefully will help address those issues as well?
Yes, as you said, I'm a busy lawyer, so I haven't reviewed this morning what we put together recently. But based on my recollection, what we're proposing will both the Bishop Transition Committee that sits at all times, or a standing committee, will be tasked with thinking about and advising annual convention and mission council as to how to best recruit people from all corners of our diocese, whether that's based on rural and urban, suburban parishes, whether that's based on our affinity groups, whether that's based on people and clergy of color, LGBTQIA+, to make sure that we're in everything in between, our Spanish-speaking congregations, our Creole-speaking congregations, our historically Black parishes, just ensuring that we're drawing from all corners of the diocese in first creating the committees, and second in how we go, as they're working through best practices for conducting a search and transition, how to reach those people reach everyone in conducting listening sessions, et cetera, so that their voices are heard, and putting together the profile, which is the summary of who we are as a diocese and is the main document and searching for a bishop. And then also at the same, I guess there's a third part that I didn't mention, is also in ensuring that we're doing everything we can to seek out a broad swath of candidates in our nomination process. And so at all of those points, intentional thought beforehand and in how our process works is important. And making it, not that we did a terrible job of doing that, but it's something that we can always do with more intentionality in the process. We had a diverse slate of candidates. We had a diverse slate of applicants, or a diverse range of applicants. And so our profile did a great job was responsible for that. But our committees themselves could have been more diverse, and we weren't I know some of us felt we could have heard more from all parts of our diocese, and what the best ways to do that are, because it's not the same for every group as to how information is collected and shared, and how people are brought onto the committee either. And so those are things we want to be thinking about. Those are things that the bodies that are tasked with making nominations to the transition and the nominating committee are called to do, is to ensure that we're reaching all voices.
Thank you, Zach. That's helpful. Linda, any thoughts you want to share, or Martha, any thoughts you want to share about the committee on the election of the bishop?
Well, I think that Brad, as you've described it at a high level, just having a group of people who are very intentional about this work in between times of election is going to be a wonderful thing, because it's going to allow us to stay more abreast of what's happening in the wider church on an ongoing basis. If there are changes in the transition process that come out of the presiding bishop's office or whatever that nature. And also, to Zach's point, to really be paying much more attention to the members of the body that will be doing the selecting. In the listening sessions, I think we did try to bring in those groups that we didn't have represented on our committee, and yet it would have been very helpful to have wider diversity on our committee. So I think this, in the small S standing committee that we are proposing will really help us in trying to figure out what's the best way for us to nominate members of the committee and ensure that we have the diversity for the next time around.
Thank you. Martha, thoughts?
There we go. I made that work. I wasn't on the original Bishop election committee. I came in then later, and it's just amazing what we can do in Christ with a group of people that come together and have this wonderful what do I want to say? This wonderful blending of knowledge and caring, so that when it happens again, because we never know when it's going to happen. I mean, could, Jeff, I'm sorry, but you could, not be with us, tonight. And we go, oh my gosh, what do we do? This is going to be such like a good guidance for us. We can pull it up and say 1, 2, 3. Now, as we go through with this committee during the year, people will come and go. There'll be new ideas, but it's like editing a book. Okay. And then when we open it up, all right, we've got to do this right away. 1, 2, and 3. We don't have to do this. We can figure this out later. And how we go about bringing all of these groups' diversity together so we can receive some kind of idea which way the Lord wants us to go. It's been a wonderful experience for me.
That's great, Martha. Thank you. I think that's also a wonderful transition to talk about the committees themselves, the nominating committee and the transition committee. And as I think Linda and Zach mentioned, the proposal is to separate those and to make 2 different organizations. I'll give you the quick nuts and bolts and then invite comments and thoughts. The nominating committee would be would consist of 18 people. 6 of which would be chosen by the regions, and 12 chosen by the mission council from a slate of 16 people nominated by the standing committee. That's with the big S and the big C. And so that mirrors how the mission council is created. You may remember that regions provide half the membership of the mission council, and then the ministry networks provide the other half. So again, sort of mirroring, not identical, but reflecting that same relationship. And then the transition committee is a smaller committee. It's got 12 people, again, 6 selected by the region, so 1 from each region, and 6 selected by the mission council from a slate nominated by the standing committee. And so they would be formed at the same time, these 2 committees, even though the transition committee, its work, as I mentioned, and then Linda mentioned, its work primarily comes after the nominating process is complete, but they would be formed together and would convene at least initially together. The other piece to this resolution that is a little different is we encourage non-members of these committees, particularly at the transition work, who can be involved. The nominating committee, there's a lot of parts of that would be more difficult and really have to be more confidential and kept within that group. But the resolution encourages the transition committee to involve a wide network of folks who can help prepare all the different aspects, and there are many aspects to the transition process. I'll leave it there and invite our panel, as it were, to share thoughts about the transition committee or the nominating committee, or how these 2 will be formed and do their work.
I can go first.
Sure.
So the numbers, I'll speak to the numbers on the committee and then kind of the makeup of them. We did feel that the number that we ended up with at 18 was nimble, and it was kind of a sweet spot for us. With 24, it did get a little gamely, if that's the right word. And so to have a slightly reduced body was not we don't feel will be a hindrance when it comes to the nominating committee. And and we also wanted to ensure that as we talked about, diversity is maintained, and that's a big task both for the Mission Council and for the regions in making their nominations. But our regions have a tendency to function a lot like, as I would put it, the U.S. Senate, and that our regions aren't as diverse as our entire body of Christ. And so we wanted to ensure that the Mission Council would have the nominations from the Mission Council will allow a little bit to offset that, so that we don't have an overrepresentation by any one constituency. And then when it comes to the transition committee, I think it is a much more nimble body. It can take on people as it did in if we had a subcommittee for transition in this last election process, but it brought on a lot of people from outside of the committee who were specialized in certain tasks that we do on a regular basis. So, in preparing for the consecration itself, there were a lot of aspects that are similar to what we do in liturgy and logistics that people do all the time, every year for annual convention. And so we were able to bring those people in. Another piece of it to consider is that it's not just 18 and 12. You still do have the standing Bishop Transition Committee members who are serving on those committees. You've got, as it functions, you'll have 2 overarching chairs, you'll have, and then co-chairs, and then 2 co-chairs for each, the nominating and the transition committee, to where effectively you have something like 22 and 20, or sorry, that's not the right math, 22 and 16 members of each of those committees. And then those co-chairs serve as a executive committee essentially over the process, during the process. And so it sets up more structure within that, makes it more nimble, and the election or the nomination to those committees is intended to ensure, again, more diversity of thought and experience.
Thank you, Zach. Other thoughts about the committees?
I want to add to Zach's comments. When we did lose some folks from the transition committee, and we have built into this newer process the ability to replace them. So with the help of the large standing committee. So I think that we'll be able to maintain that level of involvement of people, which we decided as we were in the other process, depending on when someone left, we felt we didn't need to replace them at that point, but we will be more intentional about that now with the new committee. And I think, Zach, you covered, I agree with all that you said, so thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Linda.
I was
Jeff?
going to add one other, sorry.
No, please, Zach.
I was going to add one other point, and that having 2 committees operating essentially from the start of the election process being instituted upon the appointment of these people to the committees, you have someone thinking about transition much earlier. Not that we weren't thinking about it, but when you're focusing on the nomination and getting candidates and listening, you don't have time to think about the other things. And you're really working into that point where you announce the slate of candidates. And so this allows the folks who are thinking about transition to prepare for that, thinking about the budget for those pieces of it, thinking about and working with, it takes, being married to the secretary of the diocesan convention, it does take a lot of planning a year out, even, to have a space to worship in and to conduct the consecration, to prepare, and contracting with people who have to do certain tasks and ensuring that they've been thinking about that earlier is going to be a lot better. Also, there's a lot of buildup and a lot of energy put into the nomination process. And a lot of people are tired and kind of drop back and felt like they needed to drop back at that point. And this ensures that the same people aren't having to just kick it into another gear to continue going for another 6-9 months. And so I think that's also a benefit of this process, and in breaking it into two committees, it respects the people who are doing the work and also ensures the work is done in the most intentional manner that we can manage.
Thank you, Zach. Jeff?
That was exactly what I was going to share, actually, was the whole, on the day of the election, it's amazing how quickly things start to move. And basically I was elected on May 21st. I moved, I had to, find, because we don't have a bishop's residence in Connecticut. I had to find a house, find a neighborhood, find a house in the neighborhood, find a realtor, figure all of that. So, and, gifts are starting to, questions of how does this happen and how does it, so at the same time that the committee is just trying to catch a breath for having gotten through a successful election, things really take off pretty quickly. So I'm excited that there will be a group that can sort of be doing this work on a much longer timeline and be ready to pick that up and go when the time comes.
That's great. Thank you. Maggie Breen, you've got a question.
I sure do. I feel like I'm representing the people today.
Excellent.
I love this idea, and I'll confess that I haven't looked too closely at the resolution details. So it is entirely possible that the answer to this question is in there, and I could just read some paper and know what I need to know. But you mentioned that members of the two committees some of the members from the two committees will be sourced from the regions, like they are for Mission Council. And I'm curious if there's language in there about how they're sourced from the regions. The Mission Council people, they're not representatives of the region, but they're sourced however the region leadership team cares to do that. So they're elected or selected based on how each region leadership team wants to do that. So I'm wondering if there's language in there about that. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how to try to make that as equitable for underrepresented people as possible. Like in the case of the two regions that I serve, for Mission Council people, we have elected them by vote. So people have self-nominated and then the region votes for who they want. I think we've all been in the Episcopal Church long enough to know that more or less the same people volunteer for more or less the same things. So how do we encourage quote unquote the average Episcopalian in the pew, who by and large isn't super affiliated with the diocese writ large or any of the standing lowercase letter standing committees parts of the way that our governance works? How would we help to encourage people to be part of that?
Sure, I'll jump in with the nuts and bolts, but then invite my colleagues to comment. So the regions, as Maggie points out accurately, the regions are responsible for sending 6 members to the nominating committee and 6 members, so 1 each from each region to the transition committee. The proposed canon does not prescribe how that's supposed to happen, but it does require that if a region sends a member of the clergy to the nominating committee, that region is obliged to send a member of the laity to the transition committee. So you can't, it's got to be 1 and 1, 1 from the laity, 1 from the clergy for each committee. With respect to the promoting diversity and expanding expanding our role, our world, if you will, we do require or ask that the committee on the election of a bishop assist the regions in enhancing the diversity of those selected to serve on the nominating committee and the transition committee. So we really are expecting those 6 folks who serve on that committee to work with the regions and to try to enhance and grow the numbers of folks who are considering being involved, and hopefully that will help increase diversity. Other comments from anybody on that issue?
Well, I think as you just said, the committee's going to assist the regions. And I think by virtue of our talking about it more and communicating more the desire for greater diversity in all that we do, but particularly in this work, that in and of itself, I think, will be helpful. And maybe, I don't know how that team of people will actually do that assisting, but I can sort of imagine that they might even go to a region meeting that would really emphasize what we're looking for in terms of people coming onto the nominating and transition committees. So just the communication of it, I think, and lifting up the need, I think will be a big piece of their assisting.
Linda, I would also just add that one of the things I heard was learned by the last process, and we continue to live into, this isn't just about this particular piece of work, but for all the ways that we are a representative church and how we get folks to offer themselves to these roles, is that we've learned that different constituencies need to be reached in different ways. And the sort of, we put it in the newsletter, waiting for people to step forward to fill in those roles, works for some, but not all. So this is, I think, also part of larger work we need to be doing and are doing as ECCT to figure out what interventions do we need to implement to make sure we're reaching and inviting people in the way that they would respond to that invitation.
Yeah, the important word you just used, inviting. I think the personal invitation, a one-on-one invitation to those folks that we're really trying to reach is going to be really helpful. And by having this body in place, thinking about these kinds of things on a regular basis I think will be a big help.
That was where I was going, Linda. You're absolutely right. Is the fact that we'll have 6 folks whose role it will be, even when there's no election on the horizon, to be thinking about this and to be helping the diocese, helping ECCT understand what the process is and what the opportunities to be involved are. Even when there's nothing sort of urgent about, we got to get this done by whenever. I think that may help. I would hope it will help anyway, and certainly be as transparent as we possibly can be about the opportunities to be a part of this.
The other thing I'm thinking about is an unthought of benefit also to the way we're imagining this is, by the time there is, let's say the next election is in, let's say 15 years, not only are there the 6 currently serving, but there's everybody who has served in the interim who are connected. And if we've been faithful in making sure that those people who are serving have been representative, then we have this built-in group of, I don't know, 10, 15, 18 people who have been part of this process over time, who would either feel more excited about serving or be able to speak more personally about the work in their networks.
And the one thing I'd add, everybody's said a lot of what I was thinking on this question, but the last piece I think is that the little s standing BTC will also be invited to come back to both the Mission Council and a convention and say, I like the thoughts that you guys had when you put together this canon, but we think there's some changes that need to be made on any range of topics that this covers, whether it's the makeup of the committees, how the committees are set up, etc. So that if we're missing something today, that they learn in the process of what best practices are and analyzing how other dioceses are going about their transitions and putting together their committees, they can come back to convention and propose an amendment that will better serve our intents.
Great point.
That's a great point, Zach. We don't have to wait until after the next election to think about this process again. Really, really terrific. And I would only note that the last time we changed our process, 2013, I think, but I could be wrong about that. We hadn't changed it before that since 1980. So, I mean, that's a long time. That's a long time. So hopefully, hopefully we'll have a process of some eyes on this process that may keep it fresh, as it were. I think we've touched on the big changes that are being proposed in this resolution, in this new canon. The Committee on the Election of a Bishop, obviously, and the going back to 2 committees, nominating committee and transition committee, and of their different sizes. Other closing thoughts as we close out our time together? Other thoughts about the motivations or the nitty gritty or any other aspects of the proposed canon? Everyone's stunned into silence. You can see we rehearsed this carefully, but that's all right. You're getting a really fresh set of thoughts. But Linda,
I'm grateful for just the chance for us to be able to be together to talk about it. I wish there were others in the wider diocese that were with us also, but I'm grateful that we're recording it because it can be used by others who want to know a little bit more. And this is it's a lot of change to our existing canon, so and not necessarily easy to wrap your mind around if you haven't been involved with it closely. So this is nice for us to have had the opportunity to record this, and I hope people will watch it.
I agree, Linda. Certainly easier to do without having to do it in 2-minute chunks during the debate on the floor convention.
I also want to add my gratitude by also bringing theology into this. And, as a people, we don't like to talk about death, right? And I always say that the reason that we have trouble with the death, capital D, in our life is because we don't talk openly and honestly about the deaths, lowercase d, in our life that we have. Jobs end, relationships end, each day ends. Each one of these is a death. We'll never have that back. We'll never get that back. So I really appreciate how theologically sound it is for us to be living with all the time the fact that life moves on and that change is inevitable. And it's okay to talk about the fact that someday we'll have a bishop election again without feeling like we're jinxing. Well, unless Martha knows something I don't know about how tonight is going to go for me, that we don't have to wait or feel like we're jinxing it or avoid the inevitable. And so I think this is actually a really great, faithful, theologically sound practice for all of us in our lives to think about endings and changes and how that's just, it's a part of how we're together. And I think we ignore it to our detriment. So thank you for I think there's a courage behind this work as well, and honesty.
Thank you. Martha?
I think that God is so wonderful. And I think he laughs at us all the time. And all we can do is do the best that we can in not only in prayer, but in all that we do here for this committee and other things. My wish is that whoever brings us up to listen to us and see what's going on puts all of us and the various committees on their prayer list. And all of us just relax and enjoy the surprise that God's going to give us, because we never know what's going to happen, from 1 minute to the next. So he will lead us and guide us. Sometimes it's a big chore, we think, but in the end, he wins. So put it all in Jesus' hands.
Thank you, Martha. That's wonderful. Zach, last thoughts?
As I'm sitting here, I'm going to take the spot of someone who's not on the committee and knew what we drafted up. One of the questions that people may be wondering is how is this committee going to be staffed then after this is passed? I don't know if Brad wants to speak to that, but because it doesn't specifically state, you know, we're not holding elections at convention for this spot this year. So just speak to how it will initially be filled and then going forward.
Great question. You're right. And the way the resolution, where the canon is designed, is that convention will elect 2 people each year in different classes to this 6-person committee on the election of a bishop, with the idea that there'll always be, as Jeff already mentioned, always be turnover over time, but there'll also always be institutional memory, if you will. Getting that process up and running is it can be a little bit of a challenge, and we thought it a little bit challenging and maybe even presumptuous to schedule to have a slate ready to go to convention for a committee that hadn't yet been created. So that we haven't done that, and I think one option would be for us to fill the slots in the committee on an interim basis. And the way the resolution, the canon allows for that is for the standing committee to do that, just as it would if there's a vacancy and if the co-chairs of the committee on the election of the bishop think that it's appropriate to fill the vacancy. So we could fill the committee on an interim basis until next convention, and then elect 6 people. 2 people for a 1-year term, 2 people for a 2-year term, 2 people for a 3-year term, and that way start the process. So that's an option, and we can certainly explore that. But that's a great question, Zach. I appreciate that. Well, terrific. I think we've covered what we set out to do, and I hope it's useful to everyone. And as we depart, I'd only encourage Jeff to drive very safely on the way home, very safely. Thanks all. I think that's all we have, unless someone.
Thank you, everyone. God bless you. Thank you.
Take care.